All right. We'll have more time for fellowship. My name is Christian, if you're new. Thanks for being here. Today, basically what we're doing is starting a new series called Shalom, God's Plan for Peace and Wholeness. So Shalom, y'all. Uh, and the title of today's message is a bit, cryptic, I know, but it's metacognitive. Can you say metacognitive with me? Thank you. You'll know what it is in a second, but I want to intrigue you a little bit. So the reason why we're exploring this is, I think, perhaps one of the biggest outside evidences of inward grace and wholeness and completeness is the ability to have shalom that is self-evident, right? It's a mix of joy, peace, completeness, experiencing the blessings and the presence of God. It's this beautiful word that is both specific and mysterious at the same time. And it's something that when you start talking and listing those qualities, those dimensions of it, all of us lean in and go, yeah, I want that, right? There's a scripture, so we'll explore what it is, how to get it, how to build a life on it. If you pay attention, you'll walk away every Sunday with a little bit more understanding, capacity to see the world through that lens. There's a scripture in John 14:27 where Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." Now, some of you here are professing Christians, baptized in Christ. Can you raise your hand if you were one of those? Okay. So after a baptism, how many of you have experienced completely amazing shalom every day of your life? Raise your hands. Every single day of your life since your baptism. Okay, who's done 2 days in a row even? You start thinking about it and you go, I don't know about that. I've been around for a long time, and this shalom thing seems a bit elusive. Well, you're in good company. I think it happens to all of us. Here's the problem. What are the odds of every single person in your life around you behaving exactly the way you want them to behave? 0. What are the odds of just your closest friends behaving approximately how you want them to behave? They're also 0. How about you behaving exactly how you expect yourself to behave at any given time for a long period of time? Also 0. So you see the problem, right? There's reality on this end of things not going your way, and there's this shalom, this elusive thing on this end of the spectrum, and it's hard to reconcile the two. And sometimes it's hard to reconcile the two for not only weeks and months, but for years and decades. To the point where you start thinking, is this a real thing? Is there something broken in me that I just can't find that peace? I can't find that harmony, that completeness, that fullness. And I'm here to tell you this is why it's a scary subject, because you are faced with the possibility that something is wrong with you. And the truth is there's nothing wrong with you. And we're going to unpack this, and we're going to take it step by step, and we're going to make it very, very practical, right? Does that make sense? Everything is in this harmony all the time. Everything changes. You change all the time. What you expected of life and wanted of life 20 years ago is very different from what you expect of life right now. All the way from the micro level where you get cut off on Mopac and you think things. Maybe you say things. Right, all the bad words. To being ashamed, perhaps, and really insecure about your own walk, your own journey, all the way to big things. People get sick, people die, tragedies happen. Bad news arrive with a scary regularity, right? So shalom, if I can define it, and I think it's possible to define because scholars have written books about this, and they disagree. but I think everybody agrees at the very essence of it. In my mind, for the purposes of this series, is our ability to respond to this harmony in alignment with God's purposes. Right? Let me repeat this back to you. Shalom is the ability, our capacity, our skill set, the lens that we use, the way that we can respond to things, to this harmony and bad news and disappointment and shame, all the things that get in the way, in alignment with God's purposes. That make sense? So it's a very aspirational thing that we want to do here. But if you are one of those people that couldn't raise your hand to say that you didn't even have one full week of shalom in your life since you became a Christian, a follower of Jesus, what I'll tell you is that you're in good company. There's a scripture in Matthew 26, and it's a great scripture. I love it. Because it shows how human it is to lose this shalom, even in the presence of Jesus himself. So this is a story where Jesus is about to get arrested. It's a very dramatic moment. And Jesus' betrayer is coming towards him, and they start interacting. And one of Jesus' supporters does this. Without one of Jesus' companions, reaches for his sword, drew the sword out, struck the servant of the high priest, cutting his ear off. And Jesus stops him and he says, "Put your sword away. For all who draw the sword will die by the sword. Do you think I cannot call my Father, and he will at once put at my disposal more than 12 legions of angels? But how then would the scriptures be fulfilled that say it must happen in this way?" You see, basically, the same exact situation interpreted two different ways. One way is what we see. Something bad is happening, something that shouldn't happen. And the other way is Jesus' way, and it's that there is a completely different dimension to the same exact reality. There's God's plan, God's vision, God's provision, God's capability to defend. And in spite of it, this is happening, and I can interpret it a very certain way, a very specific way. Does that make sense? Are you tracking with me? What Jesus is doing is training us to process reality around us as image bearers of God, as people who exist in the spiritual realm, not just on the physical realm. Does that make sense? Here's what happens on the physical realm. With every single one of us, there's no exceptions. There's this psychological term called negative bias. Have you heard of it? If you haven't heard of it, this is what it is. Negative bias is that our brains, over tens of thousands of years of human existence, they've evolved to keep us alive. And, a positive worldview is a nice to have. A negative worldview is a must-have in those contexts because that gives you the ability to survive and procreate, live another day, right? So if you're looking out of you're a hunter-gatherer and you're walking out of your cave, you see another guy from the bushes and he has a frown on his face. You interpret that as, you don't say, must be having a bad day. You say, this guy's going to club me over the head and take my wife. That's negative bias, right? Some researchers actually claim that there's more brain capacity dedicated to processing negative information than positive information. Basically what it means, in simple terms, is that we all bend towards the negative. Every single one of us, right? It's because it's essential for survival. Our brains are given to us to help us survive, not necessarily tuned up to help us thrive in the modern reality, right? Now, what happens is, we're going to talk about this some more, is that we become maladaptive to normal reality. If somebody is not smiling at us in the 21st century here in the fellowship, if we're maladaptive, we go, what's wrong with this guy? Right? But the reality is the person probably is thinking about something else, and that's it. There is no threat, basically. So we can misinterpret a text. We can misinterpret an email. We can misinterpret a question because we have this negative bias. Deb and I were just talking about this morning. We were on vacation in the summer, and her and I really had conflicts. So we're in this beautiful place in Europe, and we're one of the most beautiful, I mean, we're literally walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the most romantic place on earth, fighting. Okay? Talk about negative bias. Like, it is so, and that makes me more mad because we're walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Like, I'm mad that we're walking down the Champs-Élysées in Paris and I have to argue with my wife. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And the reason the whole thing started and continued to cycle over and over and over again because of negative bias. Because somebody said something that was interpreted negatively, not how it was intended to be communicated. And then that person responded in a certain way. And then the next person responded, oh, so you're saying that, now we're doing this. And it went over and over and over again. Right? What a waste. What a waste of energy. So we all have this thing to one degree or another, right? We all have this negative bent. On top of that, let me tell you this is a thing that's, we've existed for thousands of years as human beings in sort of a certain state. Since the introduction of the iPhone and the internet, that has skyrocketed because there are whole industries, people in lab coats selling us stuff because of our negative bias, right? So we're bombarded by the worst news all over the world 24/7. And we allow ourselves to the degree that we allow ourselves to actually consume this stuff, our negative bias just flares up off the charts. There's no wonder why this is the most anxious generation ever. Ever. Right? So here's another term. I want to give you another term called fading effect bias. Fading effect bias is really fascinating, and I think that's going to help you understand how negative bias works in the first place, right? Fading effect bias is this. So if you want to actually do most of us are not geeky enough to actually do this, but I'll tell you what you can possibly do if you're geeky enough to do this, okay? You ready? So here's what you do. You start a journal. Okay, very geeky. Start a journal. But honestly, if you want to tackle this, you'll understand something really amazing. You start a journal, and every time you have a bad day, something significant happens, which, depending on your age, the context where you are, it happens quite a bit, right? You write that thing down. This is what happened. You put a date on it. This is what happened, and this is how it made me feel. Then you leave 2 empty spaces right under it, and you put a timer on your phone. You can use Siri or whatever, right? And basically remind yourself in a month to put an entry on the first empty space. And what that entry that space is dedicated to is, what did you learn from what happened? And almost every single time, you would have learned something valuable. Then you put a timer, and then you put another timer on, and in 6 months, you go back to that journal and you write how that changed you. And what you will discover is that most of the time, I would say 90, I think there's been studies done about this, is in the 90 percentile level, some of the most powerful, traumatic experiences of people's lives, very, very extreme. Most people 6 months later or later will say, I've gained something positive from this. That's called the fading effect bias. I'll give you an example from the Bible. There's a story in the Old Testament about this guy, Joseph. This guy, Joseph, was really, I want to avoid the bad words, not good brothers, because they sold him into slavery. Like, that's not a good day when your brothers sell you into slavery. Years later, these brothers walk into the presence of the most powerful man in Egypt, who is now Joseph. And this is what he tells them in Genesis 45:5. And now do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. That's fading effect bias. That's somebody who was reinterpreted a negative experience and understood that there's growth to be had in bad situations. Does that make sense? In John 16:33, Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. What did he tell him? He says, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. What Jesus is giving us is the key to shalom. In a chaotic place, in a place where people don't behave how you want them to, your closest friends don't behave how you want them to, you don't behave how you want it to, where things change and you change all the time. In a fallen world where we wrong each other, you wrong other people and people wrong you, you can find the ability to live in a state of peace and harmony in the presence of God with blessings that come from that. That's the opportunity here. And what we want to do during this series is to learn specifically how that looks like in your life. How to get that, how to have access to this, how to develop these skills, and how to keep it long term. I want to show you this picture of a brain. And it's basically, obviously, there's all kinds of new things that happen when people study the brain. It's one of the most mysterious, wonderful, actually miraculous things. The more we know about the brain, the more we know that we don't know about the brain. I mean, it's an amazing, it's a miracle. I'm a curious guy, so I interview people on my podcast, on my YouTube channel, and I've spoken to some of the literally top experts in the world about brain, about how we think, how do we navigate this, how do we figure it out, personally. And I've learned so much from them, I'll tell you one thing very practical for you that I've learned in a minute. But let me explain to you how it works first, right? You might have seen a version of this. There's more than one way because there's so many parts of the brain, but there's one way to see it is a triune brain. It's 3 parts. The 3 parts also have subparts and stuff like that. We're not going to go into it. So we're going to talk about 3 parts, okay? Are you ready to learn about this? Okay, so at the right by the spine, there's the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain, the lizard brain, there's other, basically, it's the things that we sort of, it functions on autopilot, right? So you don't have to think to breathe, right? That's the reptilian brain at work. Things that you do completely without being aware of it, right? When we're in Europe, I rented a car, and all they had was stick shift cars, right? And because I know how to drive stick shift, and I haven't driven stick shift in literally years, I just sat down, and I'm like, okay, we're back. Like, all I had to figure out is this specific car, there's a balance between the clutch and the gas, and it sort of stalls if you don't get it perfectly. That's the only learning curve that I had to do. After I figured that out, it's all on autopilot. I don't even think about it, right? That's that, right? We share that brain with every living being, right? With every mammal. We have a dog. Her name is Luna, and she has that same reptilian brain. She's programmed in her to be a defender, right? A protector. So we have this thing that we do and she loves Deb. She really loves Deb. So if I do something sudden towards Deb, she literally gets between Deb and I and starts barking at me and does this and just sort of, she protects. So we laugh and I freak her out basically, right? I make fun of her. And the other day it was really fascinating because we're sort of all snuggling together, right? And so Deb is here, the dog is here, and I basically wanted to slap Deb's bottom, because I do that regularly. And the dog just turns and attacks my hands, right? And so that's reptilian, right? That's it. And then I'm like, what are you doing? We're all snuggling. This is a loving thing, right? And then we discovered that if Deb slaps her hands like this, and it's Deb doing it, she responds the exact same way because it's involuntary. Does that make sense? So we all have this response, completely unconscious thing. Okay, so do you understand the reptilian brain now, right? Okay, limbic system is the thing that translates those signals and creates emotions, right? So you feel certain things. It's an emotion. And these emotions then, it's what causes us to perceive something as positive, life-giving, essential for survival, or cause fight or flight responses, right? So that's what was going on in Paris while we were walking down the Champs-Élysées, fight or flight, right? Well, fight, actually. There's not a lot of flight there, And so it's an emotion. It's an emotion. And emotions are very, very powerful. And then what happens is, from that emotional center, the limbic system, it signals to the neocortex, right? And specifically, more importantly, the prefrontal cortex, which is right behind our forehead. And this is the part of the brain that basically interprets emotion and causes us to sort of make sense of it and take some sort of action. Does that make sense? So what does the term metacognitive come from? It's essentially the psychologist's version of shalom. The people with PhDs in psychology, when somebody's very reactive and emotional, they call those people limbic. When people are sort of advanced and rational and can process stuff well, they're well adapted, they call it metacognitive. Essentially, it's sort of the psychological term that really mirrors very closely this state of shalom. You being able to interpret certain emotions in a way that is actually reflects reality, right? So you're not walking down the Champs-Élysées fighting, you're walking down the Champs-Élysées hand in hand, saying sweet nothings into your partner's ear. What we want is to become less limbic as human beings and more metacognitive. We want to not perceive things that are not a threat as a threat. We want to be less reactive with each other, our context, our environment, the news around us that come in, the emotions that they produce, and interpret them in a way that is life-giving, constructive, that we can actually do something about. That is the journey from somebody who is reactionary and limbic to metacognitive shalom. Is it too brainy? Is it too cerebral? Do we get it? Yes, it is. You can be honest. So let's talk about the practical. How do we get there? One of the top experts in the world in brain stuff, her name is Jill Bolte Taylor. I love that woman. She's so smart and passionate. She's a PhD and an academic, but she talks like a poet. And I told her that in the interview that I did on Headspace. You can actually look it up if you'd like. And she said something fascinating in our talk. She says, there's a physiological process when your limbic system signals something and your brain responds in a maladaptive way. Maladaptive is that the threat is not adequate to what's actually going on, right? Your perceived threat. She goes, the moment that happens, and you get flooded with stress hormones, and from the moment of the emotion to the time that those stress hormones are flooded out of your system, it's about 90 seconds. Basically what happens, she goes, is that until you hit those 90 seconds, you know how you respond sometimes when you see an email and you go, uh-oh, right? Have you ever felt that? That sinking feeling, like your heart sort of shrinks a bit? Or somebody in the church goes, bro, we got to talk. Have you ever felt that? That perceived threat? Physiologically, in 90 seconds, those chemicals are out of your system. And you can actually change how you respond. You can choose a different action after 90 seconds. And the question is, why can I stay angry for hours? And the reason you can stay angry for hours is if after 90 seconds, you don't use that buffer, and you choose to interpret it the exact same way. And you go over and over and over again in that cycle. But there's no good reason for you to do that. There's no good reason for you to do that. But it's so human, isn't it? In Luke 9:54, there's a situation where Jesus comes into this town and his disciples are with him, and they don't welcome him. You know, and this is Jesus, right? Like if you're walking with Jesus, don't you think it's going to rub off on you? The love, the kindness, the grace, the generosity, right? The aura of the Messiah. Oh no. Here's what Jesus' disciples did. When the disciples, James and John, saw this, they asked, Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them? But Jesus turned and rebuked them. What he's training them to do is to be more metacognitive and less limbic. That's the training, right? And we all respond like James and John. There's no wonder that they were called what? What are their nicknames? Who remembers? Sons of Thunder. It's not meant as a positive thing, I think. This is, by the way, incidentally, this is why we say when kids, or many young parents here, right? When kids sort of freak out, when we say use words. Have you heard that? What does that mean? Be more metacognitive. Because emotions don't have words. The minute you start translating emotions to words, you have to process, you have to choose how to interpret. And you have the opportunity to break the cycle of how you feel. That's why confession is amazing. Because you speak your guilt, your shame to somebody. It immediately moves it from limbic to prefrontal cortex. That's why journaling is so powerful. If you want to develop a spiritual practice, journaling is amazing. Because the minute your emotion hits the page with words, you're giving structure to your thoughts. And you can go, I understand more about myself, this situation, how I should respond, all of those things, right? Okay, so before we wrap up, 3 very specific ways that we can train ourselves, do what Jesus is doing with James and John. Are you ready? Here's the first one, practice the presence of God. The second one is love the Word of God. And third is invest in people of God. And I'll break it down for you in a minute. So practice the presence of God is this. It's essentially developing spiritual disciplines. If you're new here, you should inquire, what is this thing? Spiritual disciplines. If you're not new here, you should ask yourself, what are the spiritual disciplines necessary that I haven't mastered yet that will enable me to reinterpret negative things around me from God's perspective, from the perspective of truth. Not how we perceive the truth, but actual truth. Prayer, contemplation, Sabbath, seeing nature and interpreting that a certain way. The list goes on and on and on. Spiritual disciplines are one of the key ways to reach shalom as a baseline, to elevate the baseline of shalom. What is the last spiritual discipline that you have mastered, invested in, tried to learn, apprenticed about? Ask yourself that. It's a very important question to answer. If you haven't even started, that's great. Start with something. Pick one thing. Ask anybody in this room, hey, can you help me, where should I start, right? What's the spiritual discipline? What is it? What's the thing that will bring you, what's the vehicle that will train you towards shalom? Metacognition. And you can have those things, it's in seasons in life. You know, in my life, I started to pray as a young Christian, and I didn't know anything about it. And there was a season where I accelerated very quickly, and it just changed my life. It reordered my world. And then maybe 15 years later, I recognized that, you know what, my prayer is stale, it's just not alive, and I had to sort of rediscover it, remaster it. The mastering of the Sabbath day, it was a huge deal for me and my family. And it took years to slowly build and develop. But what it does is, in a weekly level, it restores shalom. And it fills us with a view of how the world really works, of the goodness of God, with delight and peace and joy, and it just flows over into the rest of the week, right? Loving the Word of God is another sort of thing, another vehicle for shalom. And yeah, when you begin, if you're a young Christian, you have no idea what, you don't know how to use it. It doesn't speak to you, it doesn't resonate with you enough. And if you just put some effort into it, that's why you do it daily. You read a little bit daily. You read books about how to read about it daily. You read books about how to interpret it. You get mentorship. Hey, teach me how to read the Bible. What's your schedule? What's your practice? And what that does is, if you read Psalms, for example, Psalms is one of the best vehicles for shalom, because you see the lizard brain limbic, prefrontal cortex process in literally several verses. This, you see how it works. This happened, and I feel this way, and it feels terrible. But then I remembered you, God, and I remembered your truth, and who you are, and who I am in your presence. And peace has been restored to me. You literally see the journey, right? You invest in God's people, and that's, I think the two biggest things, maybe three biggest things about that is, one is, if you get coaching, if you get mentorship, it accelerates your progress. Like, you can walk, if you want to go to Key West and be on the beach, you can walk there, and it's going to be challenging. You can take a car. It's going to take you there maybe 3-4 days, you can get to Key West. Or you can take a plane, and you'll be in the beach in about 3.5 hours or 5 hours or whatever, right? Those are very different outcomes. When you use mentorship, you accelerate your growth. If you have a distorted, sort of emotional, disharmonious life, ask for help. Ask for help, because you'll get to shalom much quicker. The other thing about this is, when you invest in God's people, you start thinking about yourself because you think of others more. Does that make sense? And it's a common practice. It's like, you can't be fearful and grateful at the same time. Those things don't go together. When you're with other people who serve you and you love them, you will be grateful. And you will be more grateful, and you're going to think of them, and you're going to remove the mirror, sort of this me-centric place to be, which actually is accelerated by social media and the notifications on your phones, or everything that is sort of enhancing those things, right? Is that you serve God's people, you're with people and not on your own. That changes the way you think. You'll start taking less selfies. And actually, that's one exercise. Take less selfies. If you take a lot of selfies, take less of them. Why? Because what you're doing is you're looking at yourself less. And you're looking at others more. Right? Disable notifications, that's another thing, right? But you can go on and on about these things. But my point is this. You're moving from being served, from somebody who is being served, to someone who is a servant to others. And that immediately will change the dynamic of your shalom. You're going to be a happier person right away. So, who here feels like they've identified at least one thing that can bring them more peace in life? Raise your hand. At least one thing. Okay, think about that thing and tell it to someone in the fellowship. Here's what I understand. Here's what I lack. This is what I'll do. Because the purpose for this is to actually factually move you from places or dimensions of your life that have disorder in them to a place of order, peace, clarity, shalom, presence of God, blessings, prosperity. I'm going to leave you with one more scripture, and we'll pray for communion. And this is sort of to bring it full circle to Jesus. Verses 19 to 20 in Colossians 1 says this: For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Jesus is the embodiment of shalom. Every single person in this room is called, invited to be an apprentice to Jesus. Ultimately, it's not about techniques. It's not about self-help stuff. It's about the presence of Jesus and us following him. And the bridge, the only way to cross this bridge, is his blood shed on the cross for us. Something that we'll never fully understand. I will never fully understand. But it's a beautiful mystery to explore every week. So I'm going to say a prayer now, and I want to invite you to this. Just take a piece of bread, take the cup, pause for just a few seconds, and allow yourself to think of Jesus, the person of Jesus, as our shalom, and how your apprenticeship might bridge you and take you there in ways that you can't even possibly imagine unless you actually take the first steps. Let's pray.